Well, welcome to the New York Foreign Press Center. We're glad you're here. Thank you to those joining online. We are honored to have Major General Armagast here, and who will give opening remarks shortly, but let's begin with a mission video that he's provided for us.
On August 24th, 2018, the Joint Global Strike Operations Center was activated due to a need for a 21st century air operations center, one that was focused on bomber and intercontinental ballistic missile operations, as well as nuclear command, control, and communications oversight. The mission of the JG SOC is to conduct strategic deterrence operations, and on order, neutralize the enemy through global strike to protect the United States of America. Collectively, we are the warfighting air component to the United States Strategic Command and the operational arm of U.S. Bomber Forces and NC-3 assets. Moreover, we are charged with monitoring the nation's ICBM force. Within the JG SOC, there are three subordinate centers: the 608th Air Operations Center, the Joint Nuclear Operations Center, and the Standoff Munitions Application Center. The Joint Nuclear Operations Center was activated on October 15, 2018. The JNOC coordinates strategic bomber command and control, intercontinental ballistic missile alert generations, and performs Air Force-level nuclear command, control, and communications reporting. Within the center, there are 7 different divisions with a wide range of mission sets focused around bomber operations, ICBM operations, and nuclear command, control, and communication. Collectively, the JNOC functions as the center of excellence in generating and sustaining the United States' most lethal force and underpins our national security. The 608th Air Operations Center provides battle space management and situational awareness for long-range strike bombers. As a functional AOC, its mission touches every geographic theater across the globe. The 608th is made up of more than 175 active duty, civilian, and contractor positions spanning 6 unique divisions: combat planning, combat operations, air mobility, strategy, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and air communications. These divisions directly support Bomb Wings, the Joint Global Strike Operations Center, and Air Force Global Strike Command through ally and partner nation flight operations, Bomber Task Force missions, and rapid mobility deployments. The Standoff Munitions Application Center, also known as SMAC, is responsible for planning and integrating cruise missiles and joint fires into operational war plans, deliberate planning efforts, and contingency operations. SMAC provides on-call support to combatant commanders by synchronizing kinetic and non-kinetic effects designed to defeat today's robust threat systems. Our mission is to support the warfighter 24/7, 365 days a year from anywhere in the world. Our mandate is to develop an unmatched team of planners and integrators capable of wielding our nation's long-range weapons. Our center is always globally postured, trained, ready, and fully capable of enabling full-spectrum dominance for the Department of Defense.
Great, thank you so much. Let me just give a quick, brief introduction for the General. Major General Jason Armagast is commander of the 8th Air Force and commander of the Joint Global Strike Operations Center, located at Barksdale Air Force Base, which is in the state of Louisiana. He's with us today to discuss strategic deterrence and the U.S. Air Force Bomber Force. My name is Melissa Wahibi. I'll be your moderator today. So the General will give opening remarks, and then I will moderate the Q&A, which we will have for both those in the room and those online. Sir, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Melissa, and I appreciate you all in person and on Zoom, so greetings to you all. Thanks for taking the time to be with me today. So the video actually does a really good job of representing what it is I command day in and day out. It's about 24,000 airmen working ultimately globally to provide that on-call strategic deterrent force that is intercontinentally capable, often postured around the world, either in Europe, the Indo-Pacific, sometimes Central Command, but always within that environment, touching all of the combatant commands as defined by our unified command plan through the president. And so about 60% of last year, we had our forces outside of the continental United States acting primarily again in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, but then also again in the Central Command area and with what we call CONUS-to-CONUS flights into Africa and South America and other regions of the world. So it's really kind of points at the inherent traits and characteristics of long-range air power and how we manage it, how we allocate it to the different commanders around the world, and how they then subsequently use global strike forces to stabilize or provide on-call support for whatever activities they have going on. So really, that's kind of how I wanted to open it up and then open it up to you all for questions and interaction. So,
Great. Thank you very much.
all right.
So this is time for Q&A. This is on the record. Transcription will be available at the end. So when you do ask your question, please state your name and organization. That's for both. Go ahead. We'll begin.
Troy Santos, Philippine Business Mirror. So the Philippines.
Yes.
What kind of deterrent plans do you have for the hotspot area of the Philippine Sea and Taiwan?
So the Western Pacific, obviously, it's a very dynamic place, always has been a very dynamic place. We have routinely kind of operated, out of Guam recently in support and around the Philippine Islands. So when I was a colonel, this was in 2013 to 14, I was stationed at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. And even then, 12, 15 years ago, we flew routine missions in and around the Philippine Islands with the bombers and other aircraft we had around there. So I would say that routine interaction and integration is kind of how we define what it is we do with others. We don't act in isolation. We act with partners and allies, and we integrate with other military forces to include not just air power, but naval power as well, particularly in the watery regions of the world. And so that's kind of a routine thing that takes place. So what results from that, I would argue, is that habitual interaction drives us to learn from each other, but also to interact and plan to integrate in ways that help us integrate better, actually, as we go forward. It's changed a lot since I was stationed there, and the habitual relationships are stronger, I would say, today. Yeah.
I see we have a question online from Mr. Song from Yonap. You can enable your camera and your microphone and ask your question.
For doing this, General. Sang Song, Yonam News, South Korea. And as you know very well, South Korea and the United States have been seeking CNI initiative, which is conventional and nuclear integration, in which South Korea supports U.S. nuclear operations for integrated deterrence efforts. So can you give us some CNI examples, like South Korean fighters escorting U.S. nuclear bombers and so on? And what kind of specific CNI cooperation have the two sides been discussing or putting in practice? And secondly, I'm also wondering your thought about, whether under the Trump administration, the nuclear deterrence exercise or operations will continue, given that during the first time, President Trump called the exercise with South Korea very expensive and costly. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I think I can almost answer both of your questions by kind of answering it with a single answer almost, which is, so conventional nuclear integration, I would categorize that as just good military practice. So in other words, when you develop and plan for and then train and exercise for an operation, you build it comprehensively. You don't build each piece and part in isolation. And so that's when I talk about habitual training and planning and exercise relationships, what we see is the ability to seamlessly integrate those operations across the spectrum of conflict, right? So all the way from competition activities through crisis and conflict, that relationship of working together, planning together, and operating militarily together is an extremely powerful thing to practice and to conduct. And so that translates all the way up into from conventional operations to nuclear operations. And so I think that kind of answers both of the questions. Obviously, politically, there will be decisions made about how to allocate decisions of where we train and everything. So it wouldn't be my area. But when I talk about the habitual relationships that are gained from working with and through partners and allies, it's very powerful.
Can you give us some examples about the CNI cooperation? I gave you one example, like South Korean fighter jets, like supporting, the bomber operations, but I think there should be some other examples. So, I mean, if you can tell us.
Well, so the way we treat readiness in my command with bombers is that I look at it as an ecosystem of capability that by demonstrating the ability to generate aircraft, to train crews, to have those crews interoperable with others inside of the continental United States and internationally, what that does is it drives us to a higher state of readiness. So whatever an operation looks like, it can be additive to readiness to conduct operations at any level. So the specific examples, it's a good one that you give, but even when we meet, for example, for a photo opportunity over a remote area, part of the world with 3 or 4 different countries all at once to get on the wing of a bomber, the complexity of that environment, the complexity of planning and executing that actually makes us more capable militarily. So that's probably a kind of a long way to answer your question, but I think the habitual relationships really matter a lot.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Manik?
Sir.
Please state your name and org.
Manik Mehta. I'm a syndicated journalist.
Okay.
I was, studying the speech made by the Japanese Prime Minister. He was in DC recently. And one of the things he mentioned was about expanding security cooperation with the U.S. But many of the Japanese reps who were there, they were talking about expanding the Quad alliance.
Mm-hmm.
And how realistic is it when you expand Quad? What candidates do you have in mind? Would it be South Korea or would it be the Philippines?
So I'm not privy to those discussions, and I wouldn't speculate on them actually. But again, what we often see when we work with bombers and all around the world is we'll have kind of bilateral activity and then we'll have multilateral activity. And I think what you're kind of describing is a multilateral activity that I don't know if it is going to be kind of self-forming or whatever the Quad was and what it might become would be a political question. And it would be an agreement amongst nations that decide to do that. And so what we do inside of that is we take every opportunity we can to work under the guidance of the combatant commander in whose theater we're operating to interact with partners that they choose for us and then also plan with them as well. And so I would say it would play out through us, but we wouldn't be part of that discussion as to how it would form. Does that make sense?
I have another question related to this. The difference between AUKUS and Quad is almost blurred.
Yeah.
Both in public perception, they see that one of the organizations, one of the alliances is superfluous, or rather it overlaps, each other. So could you please explain to us?
Well, so one of the things I would give you an example back from the military to civilians is we are very much guilty. Probably, I would guess, internationally, the same thing happens. We have kind of our own language about how we talk about things, and we have many acronyms. So I apologize ahead of time if I use some acronyms or some jargon language. But I would say that some of that plays out, too, with regards to how we perceive allies and partners and what we call them. And so, from a military perspective, I say that we interact with all of those different potential players, certainly from a bilateral perspective under the guidance of the combatant commander. But then what it becomes when it's multilateral, I guess history will kind of tell us or show us.
Hi, it's Eric Peters with Kyoto News. It's a Japanese news agency. So my question is on North Korea DPRK. Do you have any concerns over DPRK's nuclear and ballistic missile programs? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, so from a force-on-force perspective, militarily, when I was a brand new lieutenant flying F-16s in Japan, we were kind of relentlessly focused in that area at that time on North Korea in the mid-90s, when they were under different leadership and had different objectives. They were clearly driving towards a nuclear capability at that time. And obviously, there were many good reasons for the people in the region that they didn't want North Korea to have that. And so now we live in a different time, but a lot of those same concerns are still there. And militarily, obviously, we approach things to solve the military problems in support of a political objective. And so what I see, in North Korea as far as their weapons capabilities, their demonstrated capability of using them, the systems that they may or may not employ in a dynamic environment, that we study that very closely. And then we again, under the guidance of a combatant commander, would present capabilities in competition, in crisis, and in conflict, potentially, in different ways. And so, we pay very close attention to all of that.
Service. Recently, when they had the Aero India show in Bangalore, you had one of the units from the 34th Expeditionary Bomber Unit participate in that. In that context, how do you see those talk of interoperability and integration between the air forces of the US and India? How do you see that going forward? And also, do you see how do you locate India in your overall global mission?
Yeah, so that's a great example, and it just very recently happened within, I think, a week and a half ago, maybe even a little less. And so, no, it's almost a perfect example of everything I just described about interoperability and how we habitually work with other partner nations, and going forward. As you might imagine, it's a very complicated thing to take a bomber aircraft and move it to different places that require, certain types of fuel. They require certain load-bearing capacities on taxiways and runway lengths and runway widths and all the details that go into doing that. And so by conducting that activity, we learn a lot from each other and we integrate better just merely as a result of doing it. And so going forward, we are, again, under the guidance of the combatant commander, always interested in exploring and expanding how we learn about how to best operate in the world. So India is part of that.
And how do you specifically see these things going forward with India? Because you also have the Tiger Triumph coming up soon. Again, the combatant commander of the region would know specifically how to answer that, because they work together, they plan with Indian armed services, they understand what's possible and what their ultimate objectives are from a military to military perspective. And so answering that specifically gets tricky, but again, we learned a lot from Aero India. We had gone, I think, 2 years prior to that, I think 2023, 2024. 23, yeah. So 2023, we had also done an air show there in India. And so we learn more every time. I think we did it better this time because we did that one in 2023. And so, those kind of relationships build over time. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Jukka Lehtinen. I'm from Finnish business newspaper Kauppalehti. And I would like to ask, just recently, in a few years, Sweden and Finland joined into NATO. what kind of operations have changed after that, your operation in that area? And also, is there something strategic or something happening in Arctic area, what you are doing?
I think you're seeing a lot of attention in the Arctic regions right now, in the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries as well. And so there's a lot of attention on that. One of the things I think is most interesting and I'm most proud of in my time in this job, actually, is when Sweden and Finland came into NATO in, I think it was in March of last year, maybe it's February. Yeah, so we did a CONUS-to-CONUS mission from 2 aircraft, so a B-1 and a B-52 flew from the United States, met and flew over Stockholm for the accession into NATO, and then flew back to the United States. And so that's kind of a really good example, I think, of through those relationships with those countries, and in the capacity of NATO in this case, they conducted those global missions to great effect. I think it got some crazy amount of views on YouTube in Sweden in a very short period of time. But I would say that the same things are happening with Finland in that regard as well from our global power forces. And there's very much an interest in the Arctic right now, militarily, economically, all of the reasons why politically. So. Yes, sir.
My name is Islam Anadolu Agency, International News Agency, headquartered in Turkey. I would like to sort of follow up the last question and bringing the topic to Europe and Middle East if possible. In terms of your activities, would you expect any change if Russia and Ukraine war comes to the end? And also with the new current administration, would you have any different activities in terms of the Iran nuclear deterrence?
Those are all things we look at and we continue to plan with and around, depending on what's going on in the world. Again, with the global forces we have, we're on call for literally every part of the world, every corner of the world at any given time. And so the decision about how to allocate where we go and who we interact with happens at a very high level. Like, for example, in the last year, we did the B-1s flew to Turkey at Incirlik and did a hot pit, we call it a hot pit refueling, where they land, they keep the aircraft running, and they simultaneously refuel it with gas, and then so they don't shut it off, and then they take off and fly again. And so that was just done last year at Incirlik. And so, obviously the Black Sea region and with Iran, Turkey, and Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine, that's a very strategic area and always has been, and I'm sure geopolitically it always will continue to be that. And so to your point, though, I think it's a very good point. The European command commander and the Central Command commander both interact on a daily basis because of that seam or that intersection of those two combatant commands. And so I think, we pay very close attention to all of that. And we are ready for whatever we're asked to do on that.
Another question.
Yeah.
So New START is set to expire in less than a year. How would that affect your operations?
So I would say that from a treaty compliance perspective, we have been compliant and remain compliant with New START, despite the kind of what I'd call the drama around it in the last couple of years. But I think it seems to me that all parties are interested in some kind of an agreement going forward, and what form that takes will be determined, by politicians. And so what I would say is, we've been compliant with the treaty. We are remaining compliant with the treaty as it's in effect right now. And so whatever that becomes going forward, is kind of an open question, I would say.
Well, I'm sure you followed the recent Munich Security Conference.
I didn't really, but I'm vaguely familiar. Yeah.
The vice president was there. He made a speech which shocked many Europeans. I'm sure you're aware of that. Now, many of the European members of NATO almost all of them, they are getting ideas about becoming autonomous, by which the implication is that when you go autonomous, you are within yourself, within Europe, and exclude non-geographic partners. And inadvertently, it means that excluding North America. Do you think it's a viable proposition of an idea that is very realistic?
Well, so I didn't watch the Munich Security Conference. I was doing other things at the time, but I would say that I think it's always relatively normal, I think, for allies and partners to interact in ways that probably from the outside look challenging, but I think it's ultimately good because it can make allies and partnerships stronger. And so having not been familiar with what was said or the reactions actually to what were said, that's kind of what I would say is we have a good history of all working together on many things. We don't have to agree on everything, but we often work together in ways that are very productive. And I think that, that's likely to continue. We have a lot of shared interests and shared values that, we work towards, so.
The French president reacted in a very remarkable way. The moment the vice president left, I'm talking of J.D. Vance,
yeah.
He held a kind of a summit with his European colleagues. And the only question they were discussing was security.
Well, so I think on the heels of a security conference, that's probably reasonable. Again, I don't know what the vice president said or what the reaction to it was, but I think, if we're talking about security, there's probably good outcomes of that, right? So, because from the environment we operate our global forces within, we have a good history of doing just that. And again, I'm certainly, my experience in this job is only a little over a year and a half. I'm certain before that there were things we didn't see exactly the same, and I'm certain going forward there will be other things we don't see exactly the same. But the history of the alliance, when we talk about NATO, is very strong. There's probably always historical examples of internal disagreement on things, but the outcome is better in the end, I think, when we work through those shared values and interests.
So we received a question via chat. He's having a little technical difficulty, so
okay.
Let me ask it on his behalf. He's on Zoom. His name is Don Yu, reporter with the China Review News Agency out of Hong Kong. Recently, China tested 2 new types of jet fighter and caused attention of Western analysts. How do you evaluate this new development regarding the strategic deterrence? How is NGAD program of the U.S. going on?
Okay, so I saw those photos of that, those from that air show, or I can't remember what the event was where they had those flying, but no. So, military competition is kind of an eternal thing. It's not. There are often surprises. There are new things. There are, we reveal capabilities. We do things, we plan, we restructure ourselves, we organize, train, and equip ourselves in different ways, just as every international competitor would do. And so I tend to not be surprised when new capabilities are revealed. And I'm also driven on, within my command, what we do is we provide global forces with range, payload, and access for global operations for combatant commanders. And so what remains true through whatever competitive activity takes place are those things for me. And we figure out ways to deal with however that looks going forward. I think that the the Biden administration deferred a decision on the next generation air defense for us. And I think with the opportunity to let the Trump administration make that decision. So I would say that remains to be seen. So,
how many aircraft do you have?
140 between a B-1, B-52, and B-2. And right now we also have a modernization program going on for the B-52, which is going to become the B-52J, which is engines and avionics and some subsystems to modernize it. And then the B-21 is going to ultimately replace the B-1 and the B-2. So ultimately, we'll be a two bomber fleet force going forward.
Is there a way where journalists can visit the airbase?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is there a way for the journalists to visit the airbase?
I'm sure there's our PA experts can. He knows all the ways to do that.
Short answer, yes.
We received a couple pre-submitted questions. I'll offer one to you,
Okay.
considering we have a couple more minutes. This is from Mohammed Marif from Egypt. How do U.S. nuclear deterrence policies affect Middle East stability? How does China-Russian military expansion impact America's deterrence strategy in the region?
Okay. The second portion of that is also specific to the Middle East, I'm guessing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I would kind of go back to the competition piece of what I just said with regards to, competition, whether it's explicitly talked about as an activity or not, is constantly taking place. It's kind of the example you just gave of China revealing 2 new fighter systems. What is the activity of competition from a military perspective? It is if there is a perceived weakness of someone who has an interest that is contrary to yours or has values that are different than yours, and you find ways that you think you can expand your interests into that space, then you find ways to do that. And so that activity of competition also relates to nuclear. In fact, I would say our understanding of competition through the Cold War was elevated significantly as a result of one of the side, if you want to call it a benefit of a nuclear competition. We understand what that means. And I would offer, when I say we, I would say the international community understands better what that means. Now, the complexities that come from a multipolar or not just a bipolar Cold War that affects many on the periphery who may have not necessarily been part of either the Soviet Union or the United States, but were chosen partners or allies or choosing which side to be on. That dynamic is spun significantly or increased significantly when you have multiple players in that arena. So the nuclear aspects of competition in the Middle East would be complicated immensely if Iran had a capability, and that has been the explicit desire that they do not have a capability. So militarily, we plan for all eventualities. We can react no matter what ends up happening, and we will be, available for use in whatever scenario. So that's kind of how I would answer that.
Eric?
All right, so I have a question on so last year the U.S. warned about the prospect of a nuclear weapon in space or other type of weapon of mass destruction. What is your current assessment on that? What is your position on that?
So
sorry.
The Cold War actually gives a good example of some of the things that we're seeing happening now in a renewed competition where I think it was the SALT II treaty in the early 70s, 1974 maybe, where the Soviet Union and the United States both saw that it was possible to do those things even back in the early 70s. And they explicitly said, we are not going to conduct that. We are not going to do that. So I think it is militarily very problematic if someone takes that step to do that. And so, we, from a military perspective, we have to find ways to address whatever the eventualities are. And so politically or from a treaty perspective, then that's a separate question. But again, I would offer that is not a stabilizing activity when that's done. It creates dynamics for escalation that are very problematic.
Do you view Russia as taking that step to put a nuclear weapon in space?
I don't know what the current assessment is as far as what's out there, but I think Russia, again, we learned this from the Cold War, and we had a very good shared understanding of for example, what a triad meant with intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine launched ballistic missiles, and bomber forces, knitted together with a strategic command and control capability that provided for the use and control of those forces. One of the big concerns about a nuclear weapon in space is what that does to the binding elements of the nuclear command and control. And it takes away some of the time aspects of military decision making. And so that's a very destabilizing kind of thing. And I would think anyone who would do that would understand exactly what that meant.
We have time for maybe 1-2 more questions if anybody has any.
Hypersonic.
Yes.
Do you have any plans on deterring hypersonics?
So hypersonic missiles, it's another good one actually that is relative to Cold War. So a ballistic missile, like an intercontinental ballistic missile, is actually much faster than a hypersonic missile. So what makes a hypersonic missile different is the flight profile that it takes, and what it attempts to do through that flight profile is to potentially defeat warning systems. And so if you're creating systems that defeat warning systems, what you're doing is destabilizing that environment as well. And so that's why there's, I think, a lot of concern about hypersonics as far as what it does to stability for overall force structure when there is a competition. And so hypersonics, to me, are, from a military perspective, again, are a differentiating capability, but they're not a game-changing capability when you have the way to respond in the time and place and manner of your choosing. And so, they can be a system that is militarily valuable, but what's the stabilizing or destabilizing aspect of that capability?
Did the Ukraine war expose Russia's capabilities?
So I think, if you look at the systems that they used in the conduct of that war, I think quite often they were put in that situation because they had run out of the more traditional systems they would have wanted to have used, and they had expended them, and to lesser effect probably than they intended, they thought they would get from them. And so I think to a certain extent it took a little bit of the shine off the hypersonic system as a game-changing system, and it is in fact a weapons delivery platform similar to a short-range ballistic missile, for example. It just does it in a slightly different way. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just regarding the use of drones, which in some ways have drastically changed the way the war is conducted from the air. How do you see that, as something that you would be able to deal with, or is it something else, some other authority?
Yeah, so I think the Russia-Ukraine war has brought a lot of attention to that, and for in some ways, I've heard it termed it's the first drone war. I think what we most have to be careful with, from our perspective, from Global Strike Command's perspective, is that we don't learn the wrong lessons from that action. We would not have conducted our military operations in the same ways, and so don't presume that the same outcomes would be needed or derived from drone activity. Now, so look at what the drone traits and capabilities are, and determine how we might use or defend against those same kinds of things. So those are all the kind of things we're doing now. We've been doing that for a while, but I think we are kind of at an inflection point where, because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, it's now real and very ubiquitous, and so it has to be dealt with directly.
We have time for one more. Mr. Song, if you want to ask your question, please enable your mic again and your video. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question about President Trump's plan on Iron Dome. And if you look at the executive order, then there's an element about the protection of allied territories. So do you think that there's a possibility that Trump might consider deploying more THAAD system or other, anti-missile system in South Korea?
I'm sorry, what was you said like an acronym or something at the very beginning, and I missed what it was. Like the executive order on something, I missed that.
On Iron Dome plan?
Oh, Iron Dome,
there's an
yes,
element.
yes. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a element about protection of the allied territories and people. I'm wondering if there's any possibility that you think, in the plan about establishment of additional, THAAD deployment to South Korea or other anti-missile system in Korea?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I do know, like, historically, there have been fielding of systems, missile defense systems throughout the region that has been very deliberate and very considered and very much partnered with those countries and those nations. So I would assume that a similar thing would be conducted going forward. But again, I'm not familiar enough with what their objectives are specifically in that executive order. So.
Great, thank you. Well, that concludes our briefing today. Again, the transcript will be available later this evening. We will send that out to you. Thank you for your participation. And sir, thank you for being here.
All right, thank you all. Thank you.